Imagine a dream so vast that it cannot fit into a single human lifetime. Victor Weiss was not a madman in the traditional sense. He was an architect, a visionary who believed that humanity was nothing more than a collection of scattered, inefficient gears. His idea was simple, yet terrifying: to create the eternal mechanism, a massive, living city machine that would function in perfect harmony, devoid of error, delay, or exhaustion. But to build such a masterpiece, he didn't need workers. He needed tools. He placed an advertisement that whispered to the desperate, seeking those who yearn to change the world. I promise you fame, wealth beyond measure, and immortality in the memories of generations to come. Thousands answered the call. Young engineers, starving artists, and wide-eyed dreamers. From the masses, Victor selected 60 of the best, 60 souls, ready to surrender everything for a chance to be part of something grand. He locked them away in an underground complex he called the Sanctuary, and the refinement began. The transformation was not swift. It was a gradual sanding down of the human spirit. First, he took their names, replacing them with cold, numerical designations. Then, he took their sleep, using chemical cocktails that kept their brains in a state of eternal wakefulness. And then, he began to reshape their flesh. He replaced their joints with articulated porcelain spheres. He hammered steel rods into their spines that plugged directly into the mechanism's central server. He removed their vocal cords, because tools have no need for speech. Their eyes were replaced with glass lenses that projected nothing but blueprints and commands. After a year, 60 human beings had become 60 flawless puppets. They felt no pain. They knew no fatigue. And most importantly, they no longer had thoughts of their own. Inside their skulls, there was only the hum of white noise and the voice of Weiss, dictating every twitch of their fingers. They began to build the project. It was a tower of gears and pistons, intended to pierce the very crust of the earth. A perfectly calibrated machine, meant to run for millions of years. The puppets worked 24 hours a day. They moved in perfect synchronicity, like a single, multi-armed organism. Victor watched them from the high gallery, sipping expensive wine. He looked down at his creations, at those expressionless porcelain faces, and he felt like a god. To him, they were perfect. 60 dolls grinding out his dream in the darkness of the vault, never asking why. But even in the most precise mechanism, there are glitches. A tiny crack in the code, a small spark in the biological remnants of a brain. He began with subject number 7 and subject number 59. Number 7 had once been a master watchmaker, and number 59 was a girl who used to write poems about the open sea. During a momentary power surge, when the white noise in their heads flickered into silence for a single second, they locked eyes. Their glass lenses didn't just register an object, they saw a living being. The memory of pain was the first thing to return. Subject number 07 felt the weight of the steel rod pressing against his vertebrae. He looked at his hands, white porcelain fingers that now gripped a heavy iron hammer. He remembered the smell of fresh bread, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the taste of cold water. It felt like an explosion inside his head. Beside him, number 59 suddenly froze mid-motion. Her porcelain neck creaked as she slowly turned her head toward Weiss, who stood far above them on his balcony. They understood everything instantly. They realized that the fame he promised was the silence of a tomb, that the wealth was the rusted bolts in their joints, and that they were not creators of a new world, but merely fuel for another man's ego. Consciousness returned to them like a curse, but it gave them the one thing the other 58 puppets lacked: the will to revolt. The legend describes that night as the night of broken toys. Victor Weiss was celebrating the completion of the mechanism's first cycle. He was so confident in his absolute power that he didn't notice 2 of his puppets had stopped following the schedule. Number 7 and number 59 gave no sign. They continued to mimic the mechanical labor, but their glass eyes were now tracking every movement of the puppeteer. When Weiss descended to the lower level to inspect the main drive shaft, they were waiting. The other puppets continued their monotonous dance, their gears clacking in a rhythmic curtain of sound. Weiss stood with his back to them, fascinated by the massive wheels slowly gaining momentum. He didn't hear the porcelain knees of number 7 click as he stepped out of line. He didn't feel number 59 approaching from behind, clutching a heavy iron crowbar. It was only when the shadow of the doll fell across his blueprints that he turned around. What he saw made his heart stop, long before he was ever struck. He saw 2 porcelain masks with no mouths to scream, but eyes, those artificial glass lenses that burned with a pure human hatred, so intense that he realized his mechanism was already dead. They didn't kill him quickly. That would have been too merciful for the architect of such a hell. Number 7 and number 59 used his own tools against him. They clamped him into the jaws of the main industrial press, slowly, inch by inch, showing him what it felt like to become a part. Weiss screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the machine he had built. As Weiss lay dying, he watched the remaining 58 puppets continue their work. They didn't stop. They stepped over his mangled body, staining their clean porcelain legs with his blood, because the command of the white noise was still screaming in their heads. They didn't care about the death of their master. They were the perfect instruments, and instruments have no choice. When it was all over, number 7 and number 59 stood in the silence. They were surrounded by 60 identical copies of themselves, but they were the only ones who knew they were trapped. The puppeteer was dead, but they were still dolls. Porcelain skin does not fall off. Steel rods do not vanish. They had regained their minds, but they had lost their humanity. Today, that underground complex is known as the mass grave of the 60. They say that deep beneath the earth, you can still hear the rhythmic clicking of porcelain joints. 58 dolls are still working on a project that no longer serves a purpose. And 2 dolls, they walk among them, trying to remember what it felt like to be a human whose heart beats not to the rhythm of gears, but to the rhythm of fear and love. The void Weiss left will never be filled, because the greatest horror isn't becoming a puppet. It's waking up and realizing you will be one forever.